This presentation is just over an hour. Please feel free to take breaks as you need, and about halfway through the presentation, we will ask for you to take out a pen and paper.
Welcome to Canine Body Language. We have two speakers here today to walk us through the presentation. My name's Liz.
And I'm Val.
And let's jump right in. So, canine body language is a complex language that reflects what a dog is thinking and feeling. There are signals used to communicate emotions or to elicit a response from a person or other animal. Canine body language is fluid and it changes from moment to moment and day to day. When interpreting body language, we need to consider the whole dog and look at each part of their body. You cannot assume a dog is happy because they're wagging their tail or smiling, because at the same time they may have a stiff body or be turning away from you. Body language is a dog's way of talking to us. It intends to make a change in our behavior. They may tense and close their mouth if they want you to stop moving closer, or they may have a relaxed wagging tail and gentle pant when they are ready to engage. Just because a dog was comfortable being petted one day does not mean they will enjoy it the next day. Each time you interact with a dog, consider the environment or recent experiences. It is important to always pay attention to their emotions and what they need in that moment. Dogs can be conflicted. Just like people, dogs' emotions are complex. They may be willing to approach you because they want to go for a walk or eat that piece of cheese that's in your hand, but they may not be comfortable enough to be pet or picked up. Why is body language so important? Giving a dog a few seconds or even a few minutes of space to observe you, gather information, and then have control over what happens next is very important. It's important for developing confidence and trust that you are safe, that other humans approaching are safe too. It's important because our dogs, especially dogs in the shelter, have so little control over what happens to them each day. When we can understand a dog's emotions, we can better care for them while they stay with us here in the shelter. We can adjust their location, their enrichment, what training they may need, and who handles them and how. By doing this, we support their mental health and prevent worsening fear or discomfort, which can lead to more challenging behaviors. The more you understand, the more empowered you will feel to spread the word. Help us advocate for the dogs in the community by teaching and sharing how to understand our dogs' needs and emotions. Another very important piece of this is safety. Having a strong understanding of what our dogs are communicating will help to reduce their need to escalate to behaviors such as lunging, barking, growling, and biting. This graphic is a great depiction of escalating body language in dogs. Oftentimes people miss the more subtle body language when dogs are experiencing lower levels of discomfort or stress, and don't notice or make a change in their own behavior until the dog has significantly escalated their behavior. More overt behaviors such as growling or biting happen when the early warning signals have been missed. Additionally, when more subtle body language has been repeatedly ignored, dogs may learn that those subtle communications do not work and will go straight to louder and more obvious communications such as growling, snapping, or biting. If you get one thing from this presentation today, the most important thing would be to recognize lower level stress communications. Let's walk through the ladder, and first we'll take a look at displacement behaviors and calming signals. Calming signals and displacement behaviors are types of communications that are similar to things that we do, like we cross our arms, we twist our rings, maybe stroke your beard, play with your hair, or avoid eye contact when you're talking to someone. They are sometimes unintentional and help us cope with minor stress. They are gentle and non-confrontational ways to indicate that we are not completely comfortable with a situation. So we have some examples here. We have something called look away, averted gaze, yawning, lip licking or tongue flicking, sniffing the ground out of context, scratching themselves or shaking off. In this next slide, we have some photos and some examples of these calming signals and displacement behaviors. So we have the boxer in the top left is sniffing, generally when you're interacting with someone or another dog and they stop what they're doing and start sniffing the ground. It's a good indication of a displacement behavior. We have an example of a tongue flick, a yawn. The dog on the bottom left is pretty dramatically looking away from the subject he's uncomfortable with. There's a little baby there on the right. There's an averted gaze from the little Chihuahua, and a shake-off. A shake-off is something that happens pretty commonly after the dog experiences minor stress. They'll shake it off and move on. So let's take a look back at the stress escalation ladder. We talked about displacement behaviors and calming signals. As we escalate up the ladder, stronger stress reactions include things like panting, pupil dilation, shaking off, sweaty paws, trembling, shaking, whale-eye, hackling. When a dog starts to really focus on what's concerning them, they lose those calming signals. They generally close their mouth, they freeze, get really still. And then when they get to the point where they feel they need to defend themselves, they start to get physical, right? So they're showing their teeth, growling, maybe they'll show some flight behavior, so they'll run away or withdraw from you. And then we move to lunging and biting. It's important to understand that not every dog will do each rung of the ladder. Even if they do, the progression may happen within a couple of seconds. So remember to respect the low levels of stress communication so we can best avoid the escalation. Something that isn't really well defined here are appeasement behaviors, and we want to make sure we discuss those as well. So on this next slide, we'll talk about appeasement behaviors. So these behaviors are a dog's response to another's behavior they consider to be threatening or of concern. So these behaviors may look like a lick to the hand or face, a paw lift, or rolling onto their back. It may surprise you to hear that a dog who rolls on their back isn't necessarily asking for their belly to be rubbed. They may be saying something like, "I mean no harm," or "Don't do that to me." We'll talk about other cues that will help you differentiate between a dog who's asking for space or a dog who's soliciting attention. In these slides, you can tell they don't want their belly rubbed because they're also displaying signs of discomfort. As an example, Ripley, on the bottom right, the black and white border collie, she's squinting her eyes, she's pinning her ears, and she has a close, very tense mouth. So distance increasing versus distance decreasing behavior. So all dog body language can be categorized into these two functions. Either they're distance increasing, so they're asking for space, or distance decreasing, and they're inviting you to come closer. Let's talk a little bit about these two dogs and what they're asking from us. The brown dog on the left is asking for space. And how do we know that? We notice that he has a very tense, closed mouth. He has a furrowed brow, wide eyes, and he's leaning away from the photographer. Now, if you take a look at the black and white dog on the right, he's comfortable and he's communicating that it's okay to move closer. He has a relaxed, open mouth. His weight is evenly distributed on all four paws. His tail is in a neutral position, and his eyes and brows are soft and without tension. When we look at some photos of dogs later in the presentation, we'll practice more about which dogs are asking for space, so distance increasing, and which dogs may be comfortable interacting with you, distance decreasing. So when we talk about the parts of the dog, when we're considering body language, we look at eyes, ears, mouth, tail, fur, posture, movement, and vocalizations. We need to look at each of these body parts individually and then consider them as a whole. So these are the body parts we look at most frequently when determining what a dog is feeling. Most of these are probably fairly obvious parts of the body to consider, but one in particular may be less straightforward. When we talk about movements, more as we go through the next few slides, we'd like to point out a commonly missed communication. Oftentimes, when a dog is progressing from comfortable to uncomfortable, or even uncomfortable to fear, we see a sudden halt in movement. Maybe they're panting and stop, closing their mouths. Maybe they're wagging their tail and it stops. Or they're scanning their environment and then stop to stare at something. This is what we would call a red flag, because we would expect to see this change before a significant escalation in behavior. So on the following slides, let's talk a little bit about what Ness is trying to say to us. I'm going to switch to my counterpart Val. She's going to go through each of the parts of the body.
First, let's take a look at eye shape, size, and pupil dilation. The brown and white dog on the top of the page has soft, almond-shaped eyes. This eye shape and the lack of tension often indicates a relaxed dog who is soliciting attention. You are going to hear a lot of words like often, usually, or sometimes, because we're not evaluating the whole dog at this point of the presentation. When interpreting what the dog is trying to tell us, we can never rely on one body part and instead need to consider the whole dog. We will give another example of this in the next photo and then move on to just talking about individual features. The black and tan dog below him has very wide, round, and eyes and dilated pupils. This shape of eye and pupil size can indicate stress, fear, or high arousal. Again, you need to evaluate the context of the situation and other body language to determine which of these emotions the dog may be feeling. As an example, this dog also has a tense brow, closed mouth, and a short lip. He is likely experiencing stress and discomfort. Any dog with wide, round eyes and dilated pupils is in a high emotional state. If you do approach, watch your handling, as this dog could move quickly up the escalation ladder to a snap or bite. The tan pitty on the bottom has squinty eyes. This can be an inviting gesture and is often seen with a wiggly body and a slow blink, or it can be more of an appeasement behavior and be a way of asking another dog or person to slow down. The long-haired black dog on the left of the page has what we call whale eye. This is when the gaze is slightly averted and the eyes are open so wide that the whites of their eyes are showing. This is a distance increasing behavior and a red flag. You need to stop what you're doing and give this dog some space. It is often seen with resource guarding or a high level of fear. Next, we will take a look at eyebrows, forehead, and gaze. When we are observing gaze, we want to look at the direction and the duration of the look and the eye movement. Is the dog looking away? Do they have a fixed gaze? Or are they hypervigilant with eyes constantly scanning the environment or darting from one thing to the next quickly? A fixed gaze, like the border collie on the top left, is often predatory in nature and can be followed by a stalk and chase behavior. Depending on the breed, this could be instinctual and is not necessarily a sign of aggression. Nevertheless, you should be aware of what they have fixed their gaze on and observe the shape of the eyes and the rest of their body language to inform how to react. If it is a sign of aggression, you will notice more of a hard eye, like the photo to the right. The hard eyes on the black and white dog are a direct threat and a sign you need to move away quickly. These dogs are asking for space and communicating they will escalate their behaviors in order to create that space. A hard eye will also have a fixed gaze like the border collie in the first photo, but the eye shape and the body posture is quite different. Next, let's take a look at the dogs on the bottom row. The brown dog has very tense and furrowed brows. This indicates stress, fear, or anxiety. This dog is experiencing some discomfort and could benefit from more distance from whatever is causing her concern. The border collie on the right is averting her gaze, commonly referred to as a look away. This is a very polite and gentle way of asking you to slow down and give them more space. People often do this too, like when you're waiting in an elevator and a stranger enters. Most people would avert their gaze and avoid eye contact. Imagine how uncomfortable you would be if you noticed that stranger staring at you even after you had turned your head away. Lookaways are often seen at low levels of stress, but if ignored, a dog may escalate quickly up the ladder. Often, people may say a dog bit or snapped out of the blue, when in reality, they had given lookaways and other more subtle signals asking for space. Ears. When observing ears, we are primarily looking at the position of the ears and muscle tension. Different dogs have different ear shapes, either pricked or floppy, so when we're talking about the ear position, we want to be making that observation on what's happening at the base of the ear. The positions we will look at are up, down, flattened, neutral, pinned, forward, and sideways ears, which are commonly referred to as airplane ears. The tan dog on the top left has ears that are up, which means pulled towards the center of their head, and they are angled forward towards what he is looking at. This indicates interest or arousal. Compare those ears to the black terrier's more neutral ear set. Notice how his ears are angled a little more out to the side and are not so close together. This dog is relaxed, content, with a distance decreasing ear position. Next, let's look at the tan and white Pitty's ears. They are pinned back close to his head, and the base of his ears are high on his head. We would need to observe the rest of the body to determine what this ear set is trying to communicate. It can be used with both distance increasing and decreasing intentions. Compare that to the black and white Border Collie's ears that are down and flattened so much that it is hard to even see them. This is an indicator of discomfort and a distance increasing ear position. Last, let's look at the Brown Terrier's airplane ears. Airplane ears can often be a sign of stress or anxiety, but we would need to consider the whole dog before making that determination. In this photo, the dog's ears are sticking straight out with some muscle tension throughout the ear. In a more relaxed dog, you might see airplane ears with the tips of the ears flopping down, depending on the breed and ear type. Tails. Just like with ears, there are many different types of tails: curled, straight, fluffy, long, and short. So we make our observations off of the position at the base of the tail in relation to the spine. A tail position can be high, low, tucked, or neutral. We have two examples of neutral tails here. Neutral tails are a good sign a dog is feeling relaxed and comfortable. We also have two examples of high tails. High tails are an indication of higher levels of arousal. This can be from excitement or stress. The higher the tail, the higher the arousal level. Notice the difference in height between these two examples. The Jack Russell's tail on the bottom is extremely high. The white shepherd here has a low tail, which can indicate some stress or uncertainty, while the spotted dog's tail on the far left is tucked underneath her body, showing us she is experiencing a high level of stress, fear, or anxiety. In addition to the position, the movement of the tail is also very important. A wag does not always mean a dog is relaxed and inviting interactions. In addition to the tail position, we need to look at the speed of the wag and the tension in the muscles to determine how a dog may be feeling. A wag in a relaxed dog will be loose and swishy with a melodic, medium speed, and a more neutral tail position. A wag from a happy, playful dog may be a bit faster and have a propeller-like motion. A wag in a tense or over-aroused dog will be fast and stiff, generally with a high tail position. We need to watch our interaction closely with this type of tail wag. A slow, more tense wag can indicate fear or stress. Additionally, we want to pay close attention to a tail that suddenly stops moving. A freeze is a red flag and can be a sign that the dog is preparing to take more offensive forward action. Next, we will take a look at mouths. There are quite a few features to consider, and we will start with open versus closed mouth and long versus short lips. The first dog, the bulldog, has a relaxed, open mouth, which is often an indication of a dog who is at ease. She is displaying distance decreasing behavior. The black shepherd next to her has a closed, tense mouth. Closed mouths are often a sign of stress or discomfort. Pay close attention to a change from an open mouth to a closed one. This is a clear sign of distance increasing behavior. Dogs' emotions and need for space can change very quickly, and we always need to be reading their body language to best understand what they need and how they are feeling. On the bottom photos, we can compare lip length. take a close look at the length of their lips in relation to their noses. The first dog has long lips. The corners of his lips are pulled way back into a grimace, and there is tension around his mouth. He is very stressed. The second dog's lips are pulled forward into a very short lip. This dog may also be stressed or fearful, but is exhibiting more forward offensive behaviors and likely to escalate to snapping or biting. This dog's short lips are pretty obvious, but later in the presentation we'll look at some more subtle examples of lip length. Let's take a look at tongues next. Going a little out of order here, let's talk first about spatula tongues. The dog on the bottom right has a tongue shape that resembles a spatula. It's wider at the tip than the rest of the tongue and also curls up at the end, kind of like a spoon. This is a clear indication of a dog that is stressed. We can compare this to the dog on the bottom left who is not stressed. His tongue is in its natural shape, more narrow at the tip and flat. Both of these dogs are panting, but one is clearly stressed and the other is not. A good way to tell the difference is the shapes of the tongue, but we also consider lip length, eye shape, and facial tension. If you take a look at the Pomeranian on the top left, she has long lips, a spatula tongue, wide eyes, and facial tension. That's a pretty stressed pant. Dogs also use lip licking or tongue flicking to communicate lower levels of stress. This is used very frequently in dogs and is often missed. It is really easy to see in this photo, but it's often pretty quick and not always so obvious. Sometimes it can just be a little flick of the tongue, not a full length lip lick like we see here. Wrapping up our discussion on mouths, let's take a look at whisker beds and tooth displays, including snaps, snarls, and bites. Let's walk through the whisker beds in these photos. We have popped whiskers seen on the first three dogs on the bottom photos. Popped whisker beds are seen at high levels of stress and arousal and a significant indication of distance increasing behavior. You'll notice whiskers that are sticking out and away, puckering around the mouth, and sometimes a wrinkled nose. Oftentimes you will see the whisker beds pop, tense, and pull forward before you see the full display as seen here on the black and white dog. Compare that to the whisker beds on the top left dog. His whiskers are resting back towards his face and droop at the ends, and there's no wrinkling along his nose and mouth. The top two photos display dogs who are yawning for very different reasons. Yawns out of context can indicate stress. Other body language will help you differentiate between a stressed dog and a tired dog. The dog on the top left has relaxed whisker beds and no tension in the brow or mouth. This is a tired yawn. The dog on the top right is yawning from stress. He has tension under his eyes and around his mouth, long, pulled back lips, and his ears are pinned and pulled back. To wrap up our discussion of mouths, let's take a look at some tooth displays. It may surprise you to hear that not all tooth displays are signs of aggression. Sometimes full tooth displays can be seen during jaw sparring between dogs in play. They can also be seen during loud, over-aroused barking, common in certain breeds like shepherds and other working breeds. You'll have to take a look at the rest of the dog's body language to determine if the behavior is distance increasing or decreasing. With this photo of full tooth display, we suspect it's distance increasing behavior based on popped whisker beds, hard eyes, and overall tension. The bottom right photo is another example of a commonly misunderstood tooth display. Appeasement grins, sometimes called submissive grins, are a partial tooth display, often just showing a few front teeth. You will need to look at the rest of the dog's body language to determine what they are asking for. They may be feeling concerned or threatened, and might pair their grin with a paw lift to resolve conflict, or they may be feeling excited and pair their grin with a wiggly body. We can compare the appeasement grin with a snarl, which is another tooth display and a clear indicator of distance increasing behavior. You might see a few more teeth, but the most obvious distant differences are the whisker beds, short lips, hard eyes, and tension in the brow and mouth. We don't have any photos of a snap here, but a good thing to remember is that a snap is an intentional warning. Dogs don't generally miss. If they wanted to bite, they would have. Snaps mean the dog is using good bite condition. Vocalizations. Dogs make a variety of vocalizations that can indicate how they are feeling at a particular moment. Vocalizations can include barking, growling, whining, whimpering, or howling. Barking can look and sound very different depending on their emotional state. Some examples are alert barking, hard barking, and demand barking. There are 2 wonderful articles that talk about growling and why we should not punish this behavior. The following are quotes from those articles, and if you are interested in reading the rest, the links are included on this slide. From Whole Dog Journal, Understand Why Your Dog Growls. We now know that aggressive displays are normal, natural, nonviolent forms of communication. Growling is a dog's way of saying stop, stay away, or go away. Once a person stops whatever behavior triggered the growling or gives the dog more space, the dog will stop growling. A healthy dog will not escalate once the interaction ends. They don't need to. They were able to communicate their discomfort, and we listen. Dogs don't bite when a growl will do. From Four Paws University, Don't Punish the Growl. When you punish a growl or other early warning signs, you may succeed in suppressing the growl, snarl, snap, or other warning behavior, but you don't take away the stress that caused the growl in the first place. In fact, you increase the stress because now you, the dog's owner, have become unpredictable and violent as well. Worst of all, and most significantly, if you succeed in suppressing the warning signals, you end up with a dog who bites without warning. He has learned that it's not safe to warn, so he doesn't. Fur. There are some physiological responses to emotion seen in a dog's fur. Piloerection or hackling is when a dog's fur stands up and can occur anywhere from the base of the neck down to the base of the tail. It is a common response to stress or fear, but it can also be arousal based. It can be obvious as seen in the photo in the bottom left, or more subtle as seen in the bottom right. Shedding is also a common response to stress and is generally noted to be excessive in relation to what is normal for the dog. Posture. The last individual body part that we are going to talk about today is posture. Posture is really important and informative. When looking at body posture, we need to look at weight distribution, hunched versus straight back, movement, tension, and paw lifts. We have a couple examples of differing weight distributions. A comfortable, relaxed dog will generally have weight equally distributed on all 4 paws, versus a dog who is uncomfortable will shift their weight away from the source of their discomfort. We also see differences in the shape of their back. Uncomfortable dogs will often have a more hunched posture, while more confident dogs will have a straight back. We have talked about this in a few slides, but again, changes in movement are a clear indicator of a change in emotional state. If a dog freezes and remains perfectly still, we would consider that a red flag and you need to move away and stop what you are doing. We have also discussed tension quite a lot today and can apply the same interpretations to body tension. A good example of a loose body is the black and white dog, and an example of a tense body can be seen in the Jack Russell, the tan and white pitty, and the brown and white hound. The last thing we want to draw your attention to is a paw lift. This communicates low levels of stress or discomfort and is either trying to resolve conflict or ask you to slow down. It is important to remember that these low levels of stress communication deserve respect, because if they don't get the space they are asking for, they may escalate up the ladder to more offensive behaviors. All right, let's kick it back over to Liz to talk about terms.
Okay, so let's talk terms, talk about subjective versus objective language. Using subjective language can be confusing, and it's not very helpful because it can be different depending on the person describing the behavior. One person may say a dog is happy, and the other may call him excited for exhibiting the same behavior. One person may say a dog is guilty, while another may say he is worried for the same behavior. And one person may call the dog crazy, and someone else may call the dog aggressive for exhibiting the same behavior. In order to effectively communicate a dog's behavior and address whatever the dog may need, we need to use objective language to describe what you are seeing. As an example, sometimes people will say a dog is aggressive when in fact they're seeing a dog who's pulling on leash, ears are forward, brows are tense, they're hard barking, and they're really struggling to redirect their attention away from another dog. This dog could be dog friendly, but we're labeling them and will cause the assumption that they're not. So let's talk a little bit about why we shouldn't use the terms dominant and submissive. There's a lot of resources out there that can tell us a little bit more about this, but there's a nice article called Debunking the Alpha Dog Theory. The article is listed here on the slide, and below it there's a nice quote from the article. There's a video that we'll share with you after the presentation that goes into where the Alpha Dog Theory came from. It's from a study that was published in the 1970s from a group of wolves brought together from different family groups that were forced to live in captivity, and really is not applicable to domesticated dogs. Generally, when people use these two terms, they're looking for words to describe a dog's behavior towards another dog. So what words can we use instead? We can use words like appeasing, tolerant, social, or words like rude, over-escalated, offensive, and defensive. And as a reminder, we should always follow up these words with objective descriptions of their body language. So to practice some of the skills we've learned, I'm going to pass it back over to Val.
Okay, now that we have a full overview of what to look for when observing body language, let's practice looking at a few pictures. To get the most out of this exercise, I'd recommend getting out a pen and paper so you can write down your observations as we go along. We will systematically look at each area of the dog's body to objectively describe what we are seeing. Then take all the pieces of the puzzle into consideration as a whole and draw a conclusion on how that dog might be feeling and what they might be trying to communicate. I've purposely chosen some photos that have more subtle body language. For this first slide, let's compare these two dogs, a husky named Raven and a pitty mix named Kylo. They have some similar body language, but when you put the whole picture together, the clues tell us they are actually experiencing pretty different emotions. So first, let's look at the eyes. What do you see when you look at Raven's eyes? I see soft, almond-shaped eyes with no tension in her brows. What do you see when you look at Kylo's eyes? I see wide, round eyes, hard to tell, but possibly some dilated pupils, and his brows are furrowed. Next, let's look at the ears. To start off, I want to say it can sometimes be tricky to determine ear position since there are so many different types of ears. When determining ear position, we want to look at the base of the ear to see whether it's forward, neutral, or a back position. What do you see when you look at Raven's ears? I see a fairly neutral ear set. The base of the ear is not pulled up high towards the center of her head, and the direction her ears are facing looks very neutral as well. What do you see when you look at Kylo's ears? I see ears that are pulled up and forward. Let's move on to the mouth. What do you see when you look at Raven's mouth? I see an open, relaxed mouth. Lips look neutral, and her tongue is relaxed and draped over her front teeth. What do you see when you look at Kylo's mouth? I see a closed mouth with some muscle tension. Now let's look at their tails. Just like with ears, when determining tail carriage, we're going to look at the base of the tail as well as keep breed standards in mind because there are so many different types of tails. What do you see when you look at Raven's tail? It's kind of hard to see, but there's a little bit of tail showing here and here. I see a low tail. It's almost impossible to see the base of her tail, so I'm just basing that tail position off of the end of her tail. And what do you see when you look at Kylo's tail? Again, very hard to see his tail, but I think there is a little bit of tail here. To me, it looks fairly low, similar to Raven's. Lastly, let's look at body posture. What do you see when you look at Raven's body posture? I see relaxed muscles and a neutral posture. Her weight looks evenly distributed on all four paws. What do you see when you look at Kylo's body posture? At a glance, it could look neutral, but you can see one of his front paws is back slightly, and he seems to have a little bit more weight on his hind legs. His muscles also look tense. Okay, so now we have thoroughly considered the whole dog. We can make an educated guess on how that dog might be feeling or what they might be trying to communicate. Remember, all body language is essentially boiling down to two things: distance increasing behaviors and distance decreasing behavior. What do you think? Is Raven's body language signaling distance increasing or decreasing? I would say distance decreasing. If we want to assign some subjective labels to it, I would say she looks content or relaxed. What about Kylo? Distance increasing or decreasing? I would say distance increasing. He looks a little bit worried or unsure. I'd give him the option to observe me from a distance he is comfortable and let him decide to approach me when he is ready. Look at each part of the body and then make an assessment. Let's start with the black shepherd. Let's look at his eyes first. What do you see? I see wide, round eyes with some tension in the brows. Let's look at his ears. What do you see? His ears are, to me, pulled up towards the center of his head and are slightly forward. Let's look at his mouth. He's an open mouth with a tongue hanging out to the side. We can't see his tail, so we don't have that piece of data for the shepherd. So we can go on to looking at his body posture. What do you see with his body posture? He is laying down, but he's in a sphinx down, which is a little bit more of an alert position than a relaxed down where hips are slung out to one side. So overall, let's talk about kind of an overall assessment looking at the whole dog here. This shepherd has some features that on their own might make him seem relaxed, right? His mouth is open, his tongue is hanging out to the side, he's laying down. But when you look at the tension in his face and in his body, and then you see those wide eyes, the overall picture shows a dog experiencing some stress. All right, now we'll move on to the next photo here, this little tan pitty. This is kind of a hard one. I think just like the Black Shepherd, there's body language kind of that could go either way. So we really have to look at the whole picture. So first we'll look at his eyes. What do you guys see? I see almond-shaped eyes that are somewhat soft, and his brows aren't furrowed. But there is some tension under his eyes. If you see, sort of almost like indented right here. All right, next we'll look at his ears. What do you guys see? Okay, I see, and when I'm looking at the base of his ears, I see that they are up and pulled pretty far back. They're not pinned back, but they do have some tension in them. All right, his mouth, what do you guys see? His mouth is open with a tongue draped over his teeth. This is often seen in relaxed dogs, but he also has his lips pulled back really far into sort of like a grimace. Sometimes we call that a joker face. And if you look closely, you can see that his whisker beds are popped. Both of those are indicators of stress. He was actually panting quite a bit when this photo was taken. All right, and lastly, we will look at his body posture. We can't see the whole dog, but we can see a little bit of his body posture there. What are you guys seeing? He was leaning in towards me for comfort. So, he was seeking comfort from me. He's showing me he's not comfortable with the environment. All right, so let's move on to the next practice slide. First, let's look at this cute little tan chihuahua. All right, we'll look at her eyes. What do you guys see? I see some pretty round, wide eyes. I think her pupils are probably a bit dilated. Again, kind of hard to tell in that photo. I don't see any furrowing on the brow, but those eyes are really, really round. Next, we will look at her ears. They are not forward, not back. They're almost that airplane ear. They're kind of pulled out to the side, kind of indicating that the sideways, lateral sort of ear set indicates a bit of stress, most of the time, stress, anxiety. All right, let's look at her mouth. What do you guys see? She's got a closed mouth, and we're looking at it from the front, so kind of hard to tell, but I think that her lips are pulled pretty far forward. She's got a really, really short lip, indicating some tension, some stress. All right, her tail. Know what you guys see there. She's got, would say, a little bit higher than neutral tail. Her neutral tail, if you look at that base, it's pretty straight out there. Her neutral tail is probably a little bit lower. And a little bit of tension in her tail. I think she was wagging it, but my guess would be that it was a stiffer wag. Wag is not always a good thing when we're looking at a tail wag. We want to look at the muscle tension in the tail. The still photo, so harder to do that. But in a relaxed dog, we would see more of a soft melodic wag, where a tail wag can also be seen in a highly aroused or a stressed dog, and that sort of wag is going to be stiffer, maybe faster. Tail wag. And lastly, we can look at her posture. What do you see? I see almost neutral, but a little bit forward. I think she's got just a tad more weight on her front paws. So overall, what do you guys think? Is this distance increasing or distance decreasing? This is purposely a pretty tricky picture, you know? It's subtle. That I'm going to say this is distance increasing. Her eyes are really wide. She's got a lot of facial tension. Her mouth is closed. That forward body posture, too, to me in this photo means that she's willing to get us to back off by closing the distance and coming towards us. So, you know, I'd want to listen to her and give her some extra space. I'd probably take a few steps back or maybe turn my body to the side so I can make my posture a little bit less threatening. First, let's look at his eyes. What do you see? I see very, very squinty eyes. Not what I would call almond eyes, which are relaxed. I think they're more squinty than an almond eye, almost shut. That can be indicative of just low-level stress, kind of disengaged from you or from whatever it is they're looking at. Let's look at his ears next. What do you see? You can only see one ear there. I see a lot of ear tension. They look almost pinned back. They're pulled, if you look at the base of the ear again, they're pulled up and pinned back. Also indicating some stress, kind of a way to pull their body further away from you. All right, next let's look at his mouth. What's going on with his mouth? He's doing a big yawn, right? And remember earlier when we looked at calming signals and displacement signals, yawns are a low-level stress signal, a way for them to sort of calm down the situation. It helps them relieve some stress in themselves, and it's also their way to sort of slow people down around them. I'd say he's got pretty neutral body posture. He's not quite in that sphinx down like that anxious shepherd was on the page before. He's not in a completely relaxed down, right? He's got his hip a teeny bit off to the side, but not completely. So overall, what do you guys think? Is this distance increasing, distance decreasing? Again, a little bit of a trickier one. So hard to tell when you're looking at just a snapshot, but if I had to guess, I would say it's distance increasing behavior. Those really, really narrow, squinty eyes and that big yawn are some low-level stress signals. So he may not be asking for a lot of space. My guess is he's a little nervous about the camera. There's something about the environment that he's just trying to help himself calm down a little bit. So, I'd watch what he's doing next. I'd maybe move a little bit further away to see if he is a little bit nervous and needs a little bit more space. All right, moving on to the next slide here. Let's take a look at this tan and white pitty at the top there. Let's look at her eyes first. What do you all see? I see some almond-shaped eyes, and I don't see any tension in her brows. Next, let's look at her ears. So little different things going on with each ear there. One of her ears is perked up and forward, and the other ear is up and out to the side. Dogs can their ears are super versatile, and they can turn one ear in the direction of something that they're interested in hearing. So she looks to be, her ears are indicating some sort of interest in something going on in the environment. Okay, next we'll look at her mouth. What do you guys see? Okay, I see an open mouth. I think her lips they're pulled back a teeny bit, but they're not pulled back in a grimace. It looks like joyful, just relaxed mouth. And her tongue is draped all the way out of her mouth and out to the side. Looks like she just finished doing some romping in the forest and she's a little bit tired, pretty relaxed. All right, again, this photo, we can't see her tail, so we're not going to go over that. So we can skip to her body posture. What do you see? Her body posture looks forward. She's got a little bit of her weight on her front legs, and she doesn't look like she has any tension in her muscles. It looks like she's about to leap and bound towards the person behind the camera there. So overall, what do you guys think? Distance increasing or distance decreasing? I would say distance decreasing. She looks happy, relaxed, content. Looks like she's wanting to engage. All right, now next, let's look at this little rat terrier. We can look at his eyes first. What do you guys see? I see very wide, round eyes. Slight whale eye in that the left eye there. You can see just a little bit of the white of his eye. Like we talked about earlier, whale eyes, you can see a little bit of the white of his eye there. So whale eye is indicative of a higher degree of fear, stress, or anxiety. Additionally, you can also see some furrowing in his brows. All right, let's look at his ears. What do you see? I see some very alert ears. The base of his ear is pulled up and forward about as much as he could get them to, and they're pulled a little bit towards his forehead. So he's definitely paying very close attention to something in front of him. Most likely, based on his eyes, I'd say something of concern. We'll look at his mouth next. Okay, what I see is a closed mouth, lips kind of pulled forward a bit, really tight mouth. Again, kind of closed mouth, tight lips, facial tension. Looks like some stress. And we can look at his body posture next. What do you guys see? Most, obvious thing there is he's got that little paw lift. Paw lift is often appeasement type behavior. He's saying, I mean you no harm, please back off a little bit, give me some space. And you can also tell his body position is down and back. He's pushing himself into the floor. So overall, is this distance increasing or distance decreasing body language? I would say distance increasing. He looks pretty stressed, pretty concerned, scared. All right. Next, let's look at this husky, bottom left. It's kind of some conflicting body language in this one, so I think it's an interesting one to look at. We can look at his eyes first. What do you guys see? His eyes are pretty wide and round. I think his brows are a bit furrowed as well. Kind of hard to tell with the coloring, but they look kind of furrowed. It looks like he might have some tension under his eyes as well. We can look at his mouth. What do you guys see? So he does have an open mouth. A glance at this photo, you might think that he's relaxed based on that open mouth. His tongue's hanging out. It's hanging out directly out the front of his mouth, not out the side. And kind of a small detail is the shape of his tongue. So the base of his tongue is wide. It's kind of what we call spatula tongue, which is a sign of stress. Let's look at his tail. Finally got a tail we can look at. You can't see really the base, but you can see a lot of his tail. What do you guys observe there? I see his tail is actually pretty tucked. It's not just down. It's tucked. It's a bit under his belly. That is indicating, a higher degree of fear or stress or anxiety. And lastly, we'll look at his body posture. What do you guys see? Okay, he's got his weight on his back legs, and he's actually like leaning back. He's trying to create some more space. He's not moving, but he's trying to get further away from something. My guess would be the person taking the picture there. So, again, when you look at this photo, there's if you look at some body parts by themselves, he might look somewhat relaxed. But when you look at him as a whole, with that crouched tuck tail, the leaning backwards, the wide eyes, overall, what do you guys think? Is distance increasing or distance decreasing? I would say distance increasing. All right, last guy here. Let's look at this handsome shepherd. We'll look at his eyes first. What do you think? I think that these are somewhat almond eyes. They're a little bit round, but they're not really round. It's a little bit in between. They do look pretty soft to me, though. And I don't see any furrowed brow. I don't really see much tension in his face. So pretty relaxed eyes. Let's look at his ears. What do you see? His ears are perked up and forward. Might be curious about something going on. Let's look at his mouth. So his mouth is just slightly open. His tongue is relaxed and draped over his front teeth. So a very relaxed mouth overall. I don't see any tension. His lips look pretty neutral. Whisker beds don't look popped. All right, and lastly, really can't see a lot with the posture, but we can probably look a little bit at muscle tension. Do you see any tension in his shoulders, chest, or do they look pretty relaxed? I'd say they look pretty relaxed to me. So what do you guys think? Distance increasing or distance decreasing? I would say distance decreasing. Sometimes with those forward ears, with other body language, it might be a distance increasing. But since with those forward ears there, we've got a relaxed mouth, we've got soft eyes, we don't have tension in the face, we don't have tension in the body. So he looks pretty content. He looks like he's inviting you to come closer. All right, next let's look at this golden retriever here. We'll first take a look at her eyes. What do you guys see with her eyes? Size, shape, tension. Okay, I see very, very squinty eyes and some tension around her brows. Squinty eyes can mean multiple things. In this particular dog, I think it's more of an appeasement behavior. I mean no harm, give me a little bit of space. Next, let's look at her ears. What do you see? I see ears that are almost disappearing. They are flat, pinned, and pulled back, indicating a lot of stress. Next, we can look at her mouth. Quite a few things going on with her mouth, so I'll give you a minute on that one. This dog has a pretty big lip lick and a wide base of her tongue, a spatula tongue. Hard to see, but I think that her lips were pulled forward into a short lip, and her nose, the fur on her nose is really puckered. All indications of a lot of stress. Next, we can take a look at her body posture. What do you see? I think that, well, she's got her paws up on the edge of the car there. I think that her body weight is a bit backed, and she's got kind of a hunch rounded back there. Again, like everything else we're seeing in this photo, distance increasing behaviors. She's pulling away. She's asking for space. All right, next we'll look at this red dog here. We'll start with his eyes. What do you see? I see pretty round eyes, dilated pupils, furrowed brow, tension, a lot of tension. Take a look at his mouth next. What do you see? I see lips, long lips. They're pulled back and there's tension around the lips. His tongue is hanging out a little bit, and it's wide at the base. It's not like an exaggerated, it's not maybe a full spatula tongue, but it is pretty wide. It looks a little bit like a stress pant to me. Take a look at his ears. I see ears that are tense and pulled up and slightly out to the side. All right, and we can look at his tail next. What do you see? His tail is low and has some tension in it. Lastly, we'll look at his posture. What do you see? I see a couple things here with his posture. His body weight is on his back legs. His back is rounded, sort of hunched, and he's doing a paw lift. So overall, what do you think? Is this a distance increasing or distance decreasing? I'm going to say distance increasing. There's a lot of signals here of stress and anxiety and some appeasement behaviors as well.
As we wrap up this presentation today, I want to talk a little bit about our body language and what we can do to help a dog feel more comfortable with us. So some pretty important things. First off, don't hover or lean over the dog. It's pretty scary and stressful for them. It's a pretty threatening posture, so make sure you're standing back, crouching down, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Don't linger at the kennel front. If you're seeing a dog displaying body language indicating they're uncomfortable, if they're hard barking at you, jumping at the kennel front, if they're trembling or cowering at the back, just toss a treat and move on, because their dog's not enjoying that experience, so we shouldn't be prolonging it. Don't reach for a dog unless they're displaying distance decreasing body language. So unless you know the dog or you're seeing obvious signs that they want to engage, it's never a good idea to reach out for a strange dog, especially in the shelter environment. It's a pretty stressful situation. We want to try and keep their interactions as calm and stress-free as possible. Also, please don't stare. Direct eye contact for any prolonged period is pretty threatening to a dog. So if you're interacting with them and they're looking away, don't continue to interact with those dogs, and especially don't stare them in the eye. It's pretty scary for them. So what should we do instead? Some things we can do to make ourselves a little bit less intimidating or imposing. So rather than come at a dog face forward, try turning sideways. It's a little bit less threatening, a little bit less scary. You could also crouch down and make yourself smaller, but with a word of caution. If you're getting a lot of signals from a dog that they're uncomfortable, putting yourself sort of at face level isn't always the smartest idea. So we could toss a treat and move on, turn sideways, allow them to sniff you, don't interact with them, and then move on. If you're in the back of a kennel, it's pretty tough to do these things. It's a pretty small space. So when you first enter, if you haven't met a dog, it's good to just give them a minute to sniff you, interact with you, hand them a few treats. Make sure you're seeing some signals of comfort before you reach then to leash them up. Oftentimes these dogs are going to be jumping up at you anyway, so you're going to be not as much need to crouch down to get them leashed up, but give them a moment to check you out, give them a moment to observe you, hand them a treat, have a moment of positive interaction before you lean down, reach in to clip them up. We want to soften the tone of your voice. That can have a really pretty positive effect on a dog, to raise the timbre of your voice or soften the tone of your voice. Nobody will judge you for using baby talk. Wait for them to initiate physical contact. Not every dog wants to be reached for. In fact, a lot of them don't. So tossing a treat again is always a good idea, or wait for them to approach you. And remember, it's really important. It's really common for people to like to reach down and kind of pat or pet a dog on the top of their head, but the average dog really doesn't like that. So instead, pet their chest, under their neck. If they're, soliciting attention from you, you can scratch their back or their butt, but try and avoid the top of their head if possible. Okay, our last slide today is going to talk about or offer some other resources for you if you're interested in learning more. All of these things are really great to follow up with. There's some articles here that we really like. There's some videos that are really helpful. I want to draw particular attention to the instinct dog and behavior and training, dog body language, wagging tails. It's a really great video to talk specifically about tails in relation to body language. We also have some podcasts that we really like, some books, and if you're active on social media, there's some Instagram and Facebook accounts that you can follow to learn more about dog behavior and training. Thank you for joining us today for Canine Body Language. We look forward to welcoming you to working with our dogs. There'll be a short quiz on Better Impact, and if you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to the behavior team.